And declining military budgets have forced the U.S. Army to cut its forces by 22,000 this year, and the Army expects to reduce its ranks an additional 20,000 next year. Unlike past troop reductions, these cuts are falling on officers who intended to have a military career, and the largest group of officers being pushed out began as enlisted soldiers. A significant number of them have not served long enough to retire as captains, so they are not only losing their jobs but also receiving much smaller pensions than expected. Jessie Jane Duff is a retired U.S. Marine Corps gunnery sergeant and a senior fellow at the London Center for Policy and Research, and she joins us from Washington, D.C. Jessie, it's good to see you. Seems like I just saw you yesterday.
You did.
So let's talk about this. The Department of Defense has put this out months ago. We've talked about this a little bit before, but now there's this concentration on how the military is choosing to do these reductions. Before we get to the how, let's talk about the what. Does these vast reductions, sharp reductions, some feel it is, make us look more vulnerable on the global stage?
Oh, goodness, yes. Right now, we all realize that ISIS is an incredible threat, that was what used to be Al-Qaeda has now gotten worse by ISIS standards. And then we also have problems in the Ukraine. We have global problems throughout Africa. We've got 4,500 troops going to Africa to help with Ebola. So what ends up happening when you make these drastic cuts, which they're looking at going to pre-World War II levels, if they continue at the rate they are, by 2019. So yes, this is a threat to our national security when you start having a military that can only handle one global threat at a time versus two.
But you know, it is customary after a war period, and of course President Obama came out a couple of years ago and said that, you know, we were going off the war footing, we're out of Iraq, pulling out of Afghanistan. This is normal for there to be attrition in the military, isn't it?
Well, it is very much normal. When I was on active duty, we had severe cuts. The Marine Corps was at 200,000, and we had to cut to 174,000. And I was very fortunate to not be one of those that was cut. I wasn't eligible for reenlistment at that time. However, let me address one thing. Just because you say a war is over doesn't mean your enemy does not have a vote. Your enemy will decide when that is over. And we are very vulnerable if we cannot prevent ourselves or defend ourselves against vulnerable attack or protect our interests with our Western allies.
So let's talk about how it seems that the military is choosing to do this. It would seem, at least according to a New York Times article that was published today, that many higher-ranking officers are being cut. Most of them, it would appear by research that the New York Times did, were started off as enlisted soldiers, and there seems to be some inequity there. What's your take on the method here?
Yes, I did read the article. They're actually low-ranking officers, and many of them were captains. The biggest majority of them are going to be over 1,000 captains, and then about 500-plus majors. Now, with that said, it's a very sympathetic article, but because I served, I read into this a little deeper. These aren't arbitrary numbers where they're hand-picking. I understand how manpower works. What they're doing is they're going across and say, who's eligible for retirement? Let's move them out so that we can allow other people to still have a career. That's the first thing they have to understand. The second thing is that if you didn't serve 8 years as a captain, they can't give you officer retirement. I know that seems harsh, but the reality is I served 20 years as enlisted, and if the standard by the Army was set years ago, and knowing the Army, they made this criteria a long time ago. And if you don't meet the criteria, they have to go with it, because if you compensate for one, what are you going to do for the soldier who's cut at the 18-year mark? He or she isn't even going to be eligible for retirement. The blessing is that they get to retire. I have many brothers and sisters who couldn't even re-enlist. So there is another side to that I don't think the New York Times exposed very well.
Very, very interesting. And very briefly, Jessie, before we have to go, what do you make of the seeming trend that many of these that are being cut started off as enlisted men? in women?
Well, yes. Well, during the wartime effort, I believe that a lot of opportunities arose for enlisted, and that was to get a commission. And yes, we all had to work hard. I'm sympathetic again, but every last soldier who serves on active duty, especially those who've done 8+ years, they are all incredible. And we all have to struggle to survive. It's a very corporate-like competitive environment, and many corporations have had to make the same cuts. When money starts talking, corporations make cuts, and so does the military.
Yeah, that makes perfect sense. Jessie Jane Duff, thank you so much as always.
Thank you very much.
Okay.